Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Clark, your host of the Dr. William Clark podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to all things nonprofits, and glad to be back with you, back in the saddle. I wanted to talk quickly about grant season, right? And there are a bunch of grants that are coming out in this season, and then you got the fall season where more come out. And quite frankly, just all year long, there's a lot of grants that are going to be available to you and your organization, depending on the type of work that you do. I wanted to talk about just the simplicity of grant writing and some of the approaches you might want to take when it comes to grant writing, particularly as you're starting to think about ways to fund your work and ways to support your work. Now, there are three things I want you to think about when you are writing your grant. Number one, I want you to think about the story. Number two, I want you to think about the ask. And then number three, I want you to think about the future state. Okay, the story, the ask, and the future state. Now, the story begins with your organization. It's your organization that is really writing the story that goes into a grant application. When you think about the story of your organization, you're thinking about all the work that you are currently doing. You're thinking about all the work that you have done up until this point. And all of that work culminates into this amazing story you're getting the opportunity to tell to a funder who says, hey, we have an opportunity that we believe could be a fit for what you're trying to do, or maybe a great investment opportunity for us as we are expanding our work. Your ability to put together the story, not just any story, but the story that talks about your organization, is so critical. Because there's no one else in the industry, there's no one else among your competitors or even your stakeholders that can tell the story as good as you can. And the story that matters most, the only story that you should care about, is a story that emanates from your organization. Now, as we're talking about the story, we're also talking about all of the connected stories that are associated with your organization. We're talking about stories from your staff, your stakeholders, your customers, and everybody that has had a wonderful experience with your nonprofit organization. It's incumbent upon you to begin thinking about the various stories that have come from your organization, that has been a result of the work that you've done, that has been the result of the hard work and the years and the labor that you put into the work. What's the story telling you today, and what portion of the story would you like to communicate to a funder? That can be one of the hardest things for any organization to think about doing. What portion of the story do we want to tell today? This can be very hard for organizations because there are so many stories organizations want to tell. There are so many portions of the story organizations want to articulate that they really don't think about the fact that, hey, I can't tell it all. I can't communicate everything. I cannot tell every historical fact about our organization when we get the opportunity to tell our story. So you got to pick a particular story that you're telling. Now, because this is hard for many organizations, it's going to be important for you to think about what's the big overarching story that we have as an organization. But then number two, which portion of it do we want to tell? Then number three, what's the theme of this story that we're trying to tell, right? So if you're a youth serving organization, that's the overarching theme, and you serve 18 to 24-year-olds. You may have a focus on justice-involved youth, and you have a focus on helping them prepare for work, right? That can be the overarching story, and that's an awesome story in and of itself because there's funding opportunities just specifically for that. Quite frankly, there's funding opportunities for all of it: 18 to 24-year-olds, young adult workforce development, justice involvement, or prevention. And so as you're thinking about this big picture story, now you got to think about what portion of the story do you want to tell. If there are multiple threads that you can pull on that still articulates your story, you still got to figure out which piece of it do we want to tell. Do we want to talk about specifically the workforce development? Do we want to talk about the soft skills training? Do we want to talk about the mentoring that goes into the work? Do we want to talk about the prevention of young people going back to prisons or becoming justice involved? Or do we want to tell a different different story that we haven't told before. Maybe you want to tell a story about the academic performance of all your youth who are involved in your program. So yes, we're preparing them for work. Yes, we're preparing them to avoid the justice system and to make different choices and to live a different life. But you may be telling a different story, or you may be capturing data points that tells a different story about your youth, specifically as it relates to them being mentally, emotionally, and academically prepared to compete in the open market. That's an amazing story, right? And as you pick the story you want to tell, you also want to pick the story that has the most data support. You also want to pick the story that is different from your competitors, because you want to be able to stand out from your competitors and make sure that you are not competing in the same ocean that they're competing in, but you're competing in a blue ocean that's adjacent or different from where your competitors are. So as you pick your story, again, the story emanates from the nonprofit in and of itself. That's you. You want to realize that your story connects with the ask of the foundation. Now, the ask we're talking about is not necessarily your ask, because your ask is tied to money. It's tied to a dollar amount to support the work. But the ask that we're referring to actually is the foundation or the funding source is who is saying to you, hey, we want to invest in a program like yours. What do you have available that we can support and invest in? And so that ask is huge, because that ask is now putting you in a position to hear the need of the funder and their desire to invest and support the work that you care so deeply about. Quite frankly, when you look at grant applications and the questions that are being asked of you as you fill them out, you should be able to see the interests of the foundation. You should be able to see what they care about. You should be able to see that they are interested in hopefully the same thing you care about. But as you look at the depth of the questions and the requirements that are inside of the application, you'll start to see a theme emerge from the funder in and of itself, right? The funder cares about youth. Yep. They care about justice-involved youth. Yep. They care about workforce development. Yep. But they might be interested in academic performance, right? Anything that is related to any post-high school experience for a student, whether it's a 4-year, 2-year institution, a trade school, or a certificate program. Anything that may be related to that, you might start to pick up on that in the release of the RFP, in the middle of the questions, etc. So what's the ask being made by the foundation? This is where you should try to find the synergy between the story and the grant. As you start to notice that, you start to realize this might be a good fit, right? We're at this place where we know our work and we understand the work that we're doing. We understand who we're serving. We understand where we're going. And so here's a story that supports that. Now you're looking at the funder and saying, wait a minute, I think they're interested in a very similar thing. I think that they see the future the way that we do as well. So they're asking for programs, projects that align with their interests and their future aspirations. Now, this leads me to the third piece of thinking about grants differently, simplifying the grant writing process. As you look to tell your story, remember a specific portion of your story. And as you look to understand what the funder is asking, which is inside the grant application and the RFP, you should also be thinking about, when you combine the story and the ask from the foundation, what's the future state that we both believe that we can accomplish if we partner up and work together? So the investment of a funder is part of the partnership. Them saying you've won the grant and we want to work with you, it's a part of the partnership. You raising your hand and saying, hey, our organization is interested in this funding opportunity, it's part of the partnership. You completing the grant application successfully, if you will, it's part of the partnership. And the partnership between you, the organization, and the foundation is figuring out, one, how do we solve an immediate problem that we both know it's real, but then how do we begin to think about this future state for our key customer, our stakeholders, who really are the beneficiary of our partnership? What community outcome can we achieve if we work together, bringing our program, our expertise, our technology, our resources, our skill to the table, along with your funding support? What future state can we achieve together? When you begin to look at these three components, the story, the ask, and the future state, you should start to think about funding of fund applications or grant applications in a more simplistic way. There are, of course, more technical components to this that we can kind of get into. But for those of you who are looking to kind of move the needle forward in your grant writing, for those of you who are looking to move the needle forward in obtaining funding opportunities for your nonprofit, or you're looking to explore how to become more competitive even though you've been landing grants for years, consider these three elements here: story, ask, future state. Story, ask, future state. These three together can really create a powerful opportunity for you to think differently about grant writing and the pursuit of resources. Now, if you want to get a hold of me, you want to talk a little bit about your work, you want to talk a little bit about an upcoming project, a grant application that you're thinking about pursuing, or you want to look into any of our courses and master classes, I'm going to encourage you to visit us at DrWilliamPClark.com. Again, that's DrWilliamPClark.com. Go ahead and visit us there. All the resources you need. If you want to get a hold of me, join any classes, you can go to DrWilliamPClark.com. We'll be glad to work with you and support you there. This is Dr. William Clark. We'll catch you next time, guys. Be well.